Times when psychics helped solve crimes. On May 15, 1976, 14-year-old Susan Jacobson left her home to go to a job interview at an ice cream parlor, but she never came back. Susan's parents contacted the police, but the police said she probably just ran away with her boyfriend Dempsey Hawkins, and they refused to search for her. 2 weeks later, Susan's parents contacted a psychic, Dorothy Allison, to help with the case. Dorothy asked what the word Mar meant, claiming she saw it in red spray paint. She also envisioned an abandoned car, dual church steeples, the smell of oil, and claimed that Susan had been strangled to death by her boyfriend. Then 2 years later, 3 boys stumbled across Susan's body as they were hunting. At the site was the word Mar spray painted in red on a rock, dual church steeples, an abandoned car, and 2 oil drums which contained Susan's body. Plus, evidence at the scene showed that Susan had been strangled by her boyfriend Dempsey Hawkins, who was then sentenced to 22 years to life in prison.
A case that makes me sick. The murder of Kenneth White. These 5 teenagers was throwing rocks from an overpass. Eventually, one rock hit the windshield of White's car and hit his face.
This girl claiming to be Madeleine McCann just submitted a DNA test. For those that don't know, Madeleine McCann is a girl who went missing without a trace while on vacation in 2007. It's one of the biggest true crime mysteries of our generation, and there's even an entire Netflix documentary on Madeleine. Well, the mystery of Madeleine may have just been solved as this girl has came forward claiming to be Madeleine McCann. Now, this girl has just submitted her DNA test so investigators can find out if she actually is Madeleine or not. But a lot of the comments on her TikTok page seem to think that she is definitely not Madeleine. But what do you guys think?
The Night Stalker. A viewer asked if I could talk about this case, so here it is. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer whose crimes took place in California, and they lasted from June of 1984 to August of 1985. What made Richard stand out from the other serial killers in the past was Richard actually broke into people's homes and unalived those inside. He even went as far as stomping a girl while she slept. No longer was your home a safe place, and understandably so, that struck terror in people. By the end of his attacks, he unfortunately took the lives of 13 individuals. These are just some of them. Thankfully, he was traced and arrested on August 30th of 1985. He was charged and sentenced to death by California's gas chamber and was unalived in 2013.
This is why you never judge a book by its cover. On the evening of August 7th, 1985, police received a call about a mentally ill woman attacking her family with a gun. When police arrived at her residence, they didn't hear any shooting or hear any noises coming from inside the house. Police tried yelling for the shooter to come outside, but when she didn't listen, they went in. Inside was a massacre. All 5 family members have been killed, including 2 young children. One of the deceased was Sheila Bamber, the mentally ill woman the police have been called about, and she was holding a rifle that was tucked up against her neck with a gunshot wound underneath her chin. This case gained massive media attention, putting pressure on the police to solve it as quickly as possible, and so they jumped to the conclusion that this had to be a murder-suicide perpetrated by Sheila. But one detective felt like they were missing something and kept investigating. And sure enough, he found something hidden under the stairs at the crime scene that meant Sheila could not be the shooter. To find out what's under the stairs and who the shooter is, check out The Murders at White House Farm on HBO Max. The link to it is in my bio. It's awesome.
This is the disturbing case of the child who killed a child.
In July 2018, 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail was abducted from her bed. She'd been staying with her grandparents in the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold that evening. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. Aaron apparently became upset in the night because he had been arguing with his mum. He had had a challenging upbringing involving physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided that evening he wanted to get some substances to smoke from a couple that he knew. The couple in question were Alesha's dad, Robert, and his girlfriend. They'd been known to sell substances to Aaron previously, but he could not get hold of them. Intending to go and steal them off them, Aaron armed himself with a knife. He headed to Robert's house where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. This was obviously where Alesha was staying that evening. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the 6-year-old sleeping in her bed and took the opportunity to snatch the poor defenseless young child. Disgustingly, he carried her to a secluded location, SA'd her and then killed her. He then disposed of his clothes in the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, Alesha's grandparents woke up to discover that the little girl was missing. They straight away alerted police and locals. When the family asked Aaron to keep an eye out for the little girl, he texted them back saying, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered Alesha's lifeless body around 15 minutes away from her house. Along with a lot of the local community, Aaron's mum actually checked her CCTV of her house. She was hoping that this would help with the investigation, and it definitely did. She saw her son leaving and returning from the house that night, and she handed the evidence over to police. Aaron was arrested, and it was discovered that the clothes that he'd abandoned on the beach did actually match with his DNA. Aaron's mum also confirmed that the kitchen knife found at the scene did come from her kitchen. Aaron's Google history showed that he'd searched "how do police find DNA" and also visited a website about collecting DNA evidence. He was given a life sentence of 20 years for the killing of Alesha MacPhail. He was given 27 years, but this was reduced to 24 years on appeal. He'll be moving to an adult prison when he turns 21.
Let's talk about one of the most disturbing final bosses in video game history. God from Silent Hill 3. The objective of the antagonist in Silent Hill 3 is to birth the new god that Heather Mason is carrying inside of her. In fact, every time you die in the game, the demon behind me named Valtiel revives Heather. They want this new god to be born no matter what the cost. By the end of the game, Heather ends up getting rid of the god inside of her. But before she can deal the final blow, the main antagonist, Claudia here, ends up devouring the god right in front of her, trying to complete the ritual. Except the ritual fails. Big time. The god is born prematurely, misshapen, and only half-formed, which gives Heather the perfect opportunity to finish it off for good. Fun fact, the face that Valtiel gives God is supposed to look like Alessa Gillespie.
Do you wanna hold me? Come closer. I want you, oh lady. I know you're gonna never love me. All your touch feels like in the 80s.
Scary things caught on camera. Two girls are eating dinner while her mother happily watches. Everything seems to be going well.
Baby, I don't wanna love you. Tell me, do you wanna something new? All this time, I know.
So they continue.
Sure.
Her sister tries to calm her down, but she sees something again and starts to cry out of fear. She then stands up, not being able to be near whatever it is that she sees, and runs to her mom for protection. Her sister is laughing hysterically at all this, but then she turns around and sees it for herself.
Look at me. What's the matter?
Check out my page to find out what happens.
Today's case is one of these cases that you'll most likely recognise like the famous mugshot from. So this here is 18-year-old Shailene Moran. At the time of what she did, she was 18 years old, and this takes place in 2019. She was from a place called Pawtucket, which is in America, and in the fall of October 2019, she met a boy online who she started a relationship with. This boy was called Leonard Trowfield, and I couldn't find any photos of him for some reason. On the first day that they met in person, the pair stayed at Leonard's house. However, after day 4, the pair got into quite the argument, where Shailene had stormed out of the house and filed a police report against Leonard. And she had called assault, which Leonard absolutely denied was not true. The pair were then given a no-contact order. And the reason why I'm kind of leaning to believe Leonard is, I'll tell you why. So obviously when you're given a no-contact order, you cannot contact that person. But this didn't bother Shailene. She was sending death threats to absolutely all of his family, including his dog. So after the breakup, she then very quickly met Jack Doherty. And together they had conspired that they were going to kill Shailene's ex. And Jack was absolutely down for that. He was so ready to do it. They were sending each other texts like, if you do this, we'll be together forever, I love you, and all that. And at the end of December 2019, so we're literally talking 2 months later, Jack came down from New York to see Shailene. Not only this, he also brought an engagement ring with him. And the pair were ready to go to her ex's house to commit a shooting. So Shailene had actually stayed in a hotel nearby where the pair were staying. She didn't go with him, and they decided that they were just going to shoot whoever opened the door. So on January 1st, 2020, Jack Doherty went to the address of Leonard, and it was his mother, Cheryl Smith, that opened the door, and she was shot several times, which killed her. Another strange thing that I just want to know, I couldn't find many photos of Cheryl either. To which, after it took place, they then posted this on Facebook, which says, "We some fighters and some shooters." And she's also showing off her engagement ring in the post. Luckily, a detective that was responding to the shooting had saw this post that these two had posted. So, literally, just a couple hours later, they were arrested in the hotel room, which I just think is kind of funny, to be honest. Like, how stupid do you have to be? And the cops found the gun that was used in the shooting that matched the bullets found in Cheryl. Jack Doherty is still in prison awaiting trial, but because Shailene was really the mastermind behind it, she knew what she was doing. She was sentenced to life in prison for her part on killing Cheryl Smith.
This 14-year-old was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, making him the youngest person to ever receive that sentence. So have you ever heard of Lionel Tate? Lionel was born on January 30th of 1988. As he grew up, people described him as having average intelligence, but he did have some street smarts. He did have some behavioral issues, as he had been kicked out of school about 15 times for stealing, lying, and fighting. And it seems like those behavioral issues were never properly addressed. Lionel was also not small. At 12 years old, he was almost 6 foot tall and weighed about 170 pounds. On the night of July 28th, 1999, Kathleen, which was Lionel's mother, was asked to watch one of her closest friend's daughters, Tiffany Unick. Tiffany was just 6 years old at the time and was a fraction of the size of Lionel. She only weighed about 48 pounds. Sometime in the evening, Kathleen decided that she wanted to go upstairs to her room and left the two younger children alone downstairs. At about 10 p.m., both Lionel and Tiffany were getting kind of noisy, so Kathleen screamed down the stairs telling them to keep the noise down. She did not go downstairs and physically check on the children at this time. But at about 10:40, Lionel goes up to the room and tells Kathleen that Tiffany is not breathing. Lionel told Kathleen that they were play wrestling and that he had Tiffany in a headlock. He says that she then smashed her head onto a side table and then started rolling around on the floor where she urinated herself and was moaning, and he said she was acting like a baby. Lionel says that he left her alone and then sometime later went upstairs to get his mother when he noticed that she was not breathing anymore. By the time Kathleen got down to Tiffany, she was already cold. But upon closer examination, it would be revealed that Tiffany's injuries were far worse. She had bleeding in her brain, a cracked skull, a broken rib. Her kidneys were hemorrhaged. She had a lacerated liver, and she had so many bruises all over her body. A child abuse expert would testify in court, saying that the beating had to have lasted about 5 minutes, and it was the equivalent of a fall from a 3-story building. But Lionel claimed that he was just practicing the wrestling moves that he had seen on TV. It would take several years, but in 2001, Lionel would go on trial for first-degree murder, and he would be tried as an adult. I'm going to go to part 2. It will be up down in the comments, but I have to film it first, so give me just a couple of minutes.
Mysteries Solved on Reddit, Part 6. On August 9th, 2018, Susan Rainwater was on her routine morning bike ride down Highway 7. Tragically, she was the victim of a fatal hit and run when a careless person swerved into the shoulder on the highway. She was struck from behind at a high speed, which sent her and her bike off the road. Later that morning, confused as to why his wife hadn't returned home, her husband, 81-year-old Al Rainwater, went out to look for her. He found her mangled bike on the side of the road and eventually found her body in a ditch. He called law enforcement, they arrived, and it didn't take long to come to the conclusion that it was a hit and run. There was a big issue though. There were no witnesses. The only clue left behind was a chunk of black plastic found at the scene. One of the state troopers on the scene tweeted out and asked for anyone to come forward if they knew any information. This tweet would inadvertently spark a massive online investigation. On the evening of August 9th, a Reddit user creates a thread on the subreddit r/whatisthithing of the black vehicle chunk. Theories began pouring in fast. Some thought it was from an aftermarket bumper lip or that it was from the window where the door's locking mechanism sticks out. Eventually, it seemed like people began agreeing what it was when someone mentioned that it looked like where you would insert a screwdriver into a grill or headlamp bezel to adjust the aim of the headlamp. At this point, Redditors had a pretty good idea about what the chunk of plastic was, now they had to figure out the make and model. Well, of course, it's Reddit, so there just so happened to be an expert in headlamp bezels browsing the page. Reddit user Jeff Snuts is a headlamp inspector for the state of Maryland who has, quote, done a shit ton of headlamp checks. About 2 hours after the thread was posted, Jeff found the post and thought the piece looked familiar. He recognized the chunk as being part of a headlamp bezel used specifically on Chevy Silverado trucks produced in the mid-1980s. Convinced he had solved the case, Redditors forwarded that information to the state trooper. On August 14th, 5 days after the fatal hit and run, there was a huge breakthrough in the case. The trooper posted online saying the suspect had been arrested and attributed the Reddit tip to being key in the arrest. Thanks to Jeff's headlamp expertise and the local citizen that identified the truck, Susan Rainwater's killer had been arrested. The man responsible is 37-year-old Jeremy Simon. He allegedly told police that he fell asleep at the wheel and thought he hit a deer or a mailbox. He then changed the story that he was awake, but he panicked and didn't want to see a dead body. There was also heroin found in his possession during the time of his arrest. He was charged with vehicular homicide, failure to remain at an accident resulting in death, and unlawful possession of a controlled substance. He was later sentenced to serve 4.5 years on a drug offender sentencing alternative, meaning half in prison and the other half on supervised probation. To me, that sentencing is quite light, but I am at the very least glad that he was caught. But of course, leave it up to Reddit to have a very specific person stumble across a post that was almost like it was meant for them.
This woman is about to be executed. Guess what her last words were? This is guo shang. For reference, that is probably nowhere close to the actual Chinese pronunciation, but I heard somebody saying it before this and I tried to copy him. Sorry. She was an aspiring nurse, but she never officially went to nursing school or med school, so she worked a part-time temp position at a local hospital, trying to climb up the ranks and support her family. At this point in the story, she is 22. One man in particular basically ran this hospital. His name was Dr. Wei Zhao. Again, that's as close as my little English tongue is gonna get. He was actually poor growing up, but he had such good grades that he was invited to study in the US. He researched at Harvard, and then in 2004, he was actually called back by his alma mater to work at a hospital there. His wife could not conceive of this though, and they divorced despite having kids. He was treated like a god at this hospital. One of these people who gave him these excited greetings every day was Guo Shuang. So when he had his birthday party in 2006, he invited her. But soon enough, Shuang noticed something was wrong. She was very dizzy and tired, even though she hadn't drank enough to be that way. Dr. Fong basically just laughed it off with the rest of his coworkers, saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna go take this little silly temp worker home. Shuang woke up the next morning in his bed. Very quickly, she realized what had happened and she just started sobbing. He was kind of surprised at this, as he didn't think that she would get so emotional. I mean, he was her superior, so he kind of just thought that she would put her tail between her legs and leave. He basically said, if you hush up and leave now, I'll give you full time. She left that morning without saying anything, but as she thought it over, she realized, at least I can get something out of this trauma. She ended up going back to him and sleeping with him again, and she was promoted to full-time, just without the typical benefits. There was healthcare and a lot of other benefits that came with being a full-time employee. She didn't get any of those, but she was just happy to be making more money to support her family. A lot of people have victim blamed her because of this, saying that she couldn't have really been traumatized if she went back to him, and I just want to make it very clear that it's actually really common for SA victims to do that. It's like they want to take control of their own narrative, and they want to take their power back by going back and making it their choice to sleep with the essayer this time. Sometimes it's just like to minimize the trauma, you know, like if I went back, then I obviously wasn't that traumatized in the first place, kind of like gaslighting yourself. I don't know, even if you don't understand those reasons personally, please understand and keep the comment section civil, because trauma is a very individualized and personal thing. I mean, we don't have to understand our own trauma responses, like it's such a complex subject. Anyway, so soon she started dating this boy, and I mean boy, because at this point she's 23, he's 18. This one's the hardest name. It's Wang Zejin, I think. She got pregnant, and obviously it wasn't his, so she went back to Dr. Fong, and he was livid, he was freaking out, he dragged her to get rid of it right then and there. And when Shuang told her new boyfriend this, he was red angry. The two kind of disagree about who originally planned or decided this, both of them lying and saying it was them to protect the other one, but somehow the plan to kill Dr. Fong was made. So they met up with Dr. Fong, and they got into the car where she was the driver. They picked up Zhu Jin, who went into the back of the car, and then they were driving like really, really far away, and so Dr. Fong is getting kind of nervous. After they got him to a secluded spot, they basically said, you will give Shuang a full-time job, all of the benefits, and in whatever department that she wants to work in, or we will kill you. Dr. Fong said, I don't even have the power to do that, even if I wanted to, and they said, okay, you're gonna die. Zhu Jin then took a scalpel from behind his seat to Dr. Fong's neck. He was spurting blood, but then he managed to escape before being chased down and basically hammered to death by Zhu Jin. When the couple were caught, they just admitted it. They both protected each other as much as they could during questioning, still adamantly in love. They originally both had execution sentences, but his was actually commuted down to life in prison. This was Guo Shang's response.
就像你昨天说的，希望他们留下来，你如愿了，他留下来了。真的？为什么会那么高兴？
30 minutes after this, she's executed, by the way. 30 minutes. Zhu Jin still maintains that he does not blame Shuang and that he acted of his own volition. The response to this case was very, hot and cold. A lot of people will be more victim blaming and say, oh, well, she was just sleeping with her boss and wanted to cover it up. And then the other half of people think that an execution was not necessary because the person who deserved to be dead was already dead. And I mean, obviously I do have limited sympathy for literal murderers, but it is interesting watching this clip and the morality debate that it brings up, you know, it's very humanizing when we just think of murderers as monsters.